Welcome everyone to Open Learning Talks. I'm Eric Klopfer, professor and director of the Scheller Teacher Education Program and the Education Arcade at MIT. Today we're here to learn about Reach Every Reader, a collaboration between the MIT Integrated Learning Initiative and the Harvard Graduate School of Education, a project that I'm fortunate enough to play a small role in. We'll start off today with Liz City, who's the executive director of Reach Every Reader, who will give us an overview of the project and talk about the goals that's going on across this broad-ranging project. Then she'll hand it off to Rosa Guzman and Joe Blatt, who will walk us through the suite of early literacy apps Reach Every Reader has just released publicly. Then I'll get a discussion going with our panelists before opening up to the audience Q&A. At any time, please feel free to put questions for our panelists into the chat. Our moderators, Janine and Kate, will be collecting all the questions for me to read aloud during the Q&A. If you'd like to go on camera and ask your questions directly, just use the raise hand function and a moderator will promote you to panelist during the Q&A. If you have any questions about any of this, please put them in the chat and the moderators will be happy to help you. And now on with the show. As I said, Liz City is the executive director of the Reach Every Reader project. She's also a senior lecturer on education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, a great collaborator, and the author of several books for educators. Liz, I'll turn it over to you now to tell us a bit about Reach Every Reader.
Thanks so much, Eric. My great pleasure to be here today. Thank you all for joining us on what is, as Steve said, a rainy day in the Boston area. I get the fun of telling you a little bit about Reach Every Reader. So this is a collaboration we started a few years ago between, as Eric said, the MIT Integrated Learning Initiative, the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and we also enlisted a few partners at Florida State University to help us on this big ambitious goal we have, which is to make progress on early literacy. So as many of you probably know, we actually really struggle with literacy in this country, and over half of our fourth graders, even pre-COVID when things got worse, pre-COVID, half of our fourth graders actually aren't reading on grade level. And COVID, of course, has exacerbated some of that. We'll know more about that once we get everybody back in school. But we sought to figure out how can we help with this persistent, complex systemic problem. And so we said, well, no one school or one set of expertise is going to do it. We need to combine different kinds of expertise, and we need to harness a lot of existing knowledge base with existing and emergent technologies, as well as all of the kind of disciplinary strength we could bring to it across these institutions. So we've been collaborating for a few years. We're going to hear today about one piece of what we're working on, which is supporting early readers, because we know that literacy starts before kids ever get to formal schooling. So you're going to hear today about some pre-K apps we recently launched. We also in the pre-K space are researching whether smart speaker technology could assist with that. Eric's lab is working on that. In addition, we have 4 other areas that we work on around literacy. We, of course, want to help the early readers. Then once kids get to school, we want to not wait till they fail. Too often what happens in school is we're going to wait a few years to see if kids sort of figure out this reading thing. And by the time they get to 3rd or 4th grade, they've been struggling for a while. So we say, let's try to figure this out before they fail. So with our colleagues at Florida State, we're developing an early screener for grades kindergarten through 2nd to try to really accurately predict which kids are most likely to struggle, so we can get them the support early on. Of course, you also have to actually help kids once you've got data on who's most likely to struggle. So at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, we're developing an intervention that our colleague Jimmy Kim is leading called MORE. And that basically is content-rich literacy support for kids at home and at school. Okay, so that's all good, but then you actually also have to figure out how do we support the adults, the educators and the caregivers who work with children to know what they could and should be doing around literacy. So we have a whole dimension of our work that's around supporting adults in learning how to support children around literacy. And one of the exciting things we're doing in that area is using immersive simulations to help teachers practice what are the kind of moves I could make, and then practice with actors who are playing the roles of different students and responding. So all of these things are things kind of in progress. And then our name is Reach Every Reader. And so we really do want to try to reach every reader. So we think how we do that is through a combination of collaboration and really thinking from the beginning about scale and about reach. And so We have a whole dimension of our work that's really thinking not just about how academics often can kind of make cool things, but they don't go anywhere, but how do we from the beginning figure out, well, how are we going to reach the people we most want to reach, and reach as many of them as possible. So we're really excited to have just launched these pre-K apps. It's our first chance to really see how many people can we reach and how do we do that. So we have a whole group of people on our team who are thinking about scale and reach. That's a quick run of Reach Every Reader. I think we're not just trying to raise grade 3 test scores. We really see literacy, as Frederick Douglass once said, literacy is freedom. Literacy gives people opportunity, and it also is fun and enjoyable. And we want everybody to have the opportunity to have access to that. It of course can unlock a lot of learning too, and we want all children to have access to that. So that's what we're about. And today we're here to focus, as I said, on our first big thing that's come out of our research, these pre-K apps that 2 of my colleagues are here to tell you about. So I'm going to briefly introduce them and then turn it over to them. So first, it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Joe Blatt. He is my faculty colleague at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. He wears many hats and many kinds of expertise. He's currently the director of the Technology, Innovation, and Education Program. He has a deep history and experience with children's media. And in fact, if he ever turns his screen off today, you'll see some evidence of his former work with the Sesame Workshop. He's one of the only people who's had a Muppet made in his honor. So that'll tell you something about his expertise. And it's been so much fun working with Joe on this project. I could take our whole time telling you about his expertise, but what I most want you to know that I've appreciated about Joe's expertise is he's an exquisite collaborator. He knows how to bring a whole range of people together. And he has insisted from the beginning that these apps, of course, be deeply grounded in research, and that they need to be fun for the adults to do too, and not just kids. That the way to help people develop literacy is by making it fun and enjoyable. So Joe will be joining us. As well, I'm thrilled to introduce you to Rosa Guzman, who's a doctoral candidate at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Rosa's interests lie at the intersection of language, literacy, and technology. She's been involved in lots of different kinds of research projects. Before she came to us, she was with the Harvard Lab for Developmental Studies. She's also worked at another initiative at Harvard, the Saul Zantz Early Education Initiative. And now we were lucky enough to have her engaged with Reach Every Reader. One of the things they've most appreciated and learned from Rosa about in her engagement with Reach Every Reader is that she's deeply respectful of families and communities and where the knowledge lies when we're trying to develop things for people. Like, we know some things, but actually, families know a lot more. And Rosa has been really instrumental in the development of the pre-K apps in listening deeply to families, developing enough trust that families will tell us what they really think, and then using that information to make the apps much better. So with that, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Joe and Rosa.
Well, thank you, Liz. Unfortunately, that's such a lovely introduction that I think you set me up, so all I can go is downhill from here. But I appreciate the kind words. I'm guessing that everybody on this call who's interested in education is well aware of the crises that we keep reading about kids arriving at school unequally prepared to take advantage of learning, and how many of them are deprived of later good experiences in school because of the slow and challenging start. So it seemed to me that a clearly good idea would be to try to get ahead of that and to prevent literacy difficulties from arising in the first place, rather than treating them in 3rd grade, which has been the strategy to date. In addition, we had the advantage of some fabulous early literacy research by colleagues at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, Meredith Rowe and Paolo MITili and Catherine Snow, as well as, of course, a broad research community across the country. So that was kind of one source of these apps. A second is my sense that in order that all parents really want to give their kids the best possible start, but they're unequally have unequal access to resources and probably unequal confidence in their own ability to be their kids' first teachers. So I thought for a long time that technology could be a real help in supporting parents working with their kids. But of course, technology was also unequally distributed. So that didn't really seem to be a great response to equity problems until very recently, when finally one really high level device became essentially ubiquitous, and that's the smartphone. So then it seemed like a good idea to develop apps that could be delivered over smartphones that would help parents, as Liz said, have fun with their kids, not feel like they were doing a duty, but at the same time, really doing something that would encourage the kids' preparation for school and for learning. So the research told us that among the most important things we could do to create a strong foundation for literacy was to encourage sustained back and forth conversation between parent and child, and to have that conversation unfold in ways that encourage vocabulary growth and other good learning opportunities by being about not only what was present right in front of the kid and parent, but also making reference to things they had done together in the past and things they might do together in the future. And that you can see pretty clearly in one of the apps that I'm going to now try to show very briefly, just to give you a quick look at it, an app that we call Animal Antics. And all the apps that we're going to look at this afternoon are now in the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. So they're available free if you're interested in seeing them. Let's see if I can. There we are. Okay. So here is I'm skipping the introductory screens and the sort of screens that tell you how to play the app. But let's just take a look at one of the scenarios here. Oops, wrong mouse, gotta use my finger because we're using the phone. So as we've trained the parent and child to do in the tutorial setup, you pick a character, you get to determine the expression, and then record some dialogue. Oops. Sorry, using two devices at once here. Hello, Rabbit. How are you doing today? I'm good, thanks. So that was supposed to be a dialogue. You can see that we're keeping track of turns so that we're encouraging, quiet you, we're encouraging, let me actually just get out of this share. Encouraging the back and forth that we talked about. And I wasn't smart enough to show you before I shut it off, but I'll show you in a future app. We also provide prompts because you may have had experience when you're given a chance to have a dialogue on cue. Sometimes it's actually hard to think of what to talk about. So we wanted to take that pressure off parents' shoulders and also, again, encourage a broad-ranging conversation. So we spent some time developing this with our production partner, Fable Vision Studios. And then it recruited, probably the smartest thing we did in the whole project was to recruit Rosa Guzman to lead the effort to test and make sure that these apps were actually doing what we hope they would for parents and kids. So Rosa, you want to talk about the testing process?
Yes, thank you, Joe. So the testing part was one of my favorite parts of this whole project, since as Liz mentioned, I'm very interested in how families are actually going to be using this at home and in their more naturalistic setting. So we had families with 3-year-olds in the Boston area who were recruited. So we had about 80 families who participated in this validation study where RAs, myself, I went to families' homes and we introduced the app to families and asked them to use it for about a few weeks. We initially observed them playing with the app, just trying to get a sense of when they're first introduced to this app, how are they actually interacting with it? Are they having the conversations that we hope they would have as they're engaging through these back and forth turn taken, especially what you see there in Animal Antics, where we're really hoping that through the prompts, through the design of how to create a little scenario with their child, they're able to have these conversations and sustain them over time. And so we observed them using the app. We let them keep the app on their phones. They were downloaded into their phones, and then came back a few weeks later and watched them again and trying to gauge how their interactions have changed, to see if they're still using it the way we hope that they would use it. What are the things that parents learned from them? And through this validation work, we were able to really first highlight and learn for ourselves and see the ways that parents and children were engaging and having these conversations and creating these stories with the children as young as 3, which we know 3-year-olds can be hard to kind of start a story on their own. So parents really parents really told us how it was nice to have these prompts and these various ideas where they could actually start having conversations about things that they might not normally have with their child, like talking about some of the scenarios were like at the library, like how do you navigate checking out books and how to find that space. Other scenarios where children there's scenarios where children have to share a toy, and so a lot of social and emotional skill building there and sharing that's involved. And so parents really having these conversations with their child, and then we could see how the variety of topics that parents were having, and how well they were interacting with their child, and then see the growth that parents had from the first time that they picked up the app with their child and used it to a few weeks later. And we could see what they were learning, the differences. We were able to actually see growth in terms of the syntactic complexity that parents were having in terms of the speech that they were producing. The number of conversational turns increased from the first time to the second time that they use the app. So there was a lot of different features that we saw that were encouraging to really help us, feel confident that what we had produced was actually being used the way we hoped, but also that parents were actually learning something.
So Eric, I would just underline, and I'll turn it back to you, just underline that there are so many apps out there that claim to be educational. And I think parents are often kind of bewildered when they wander through the App Store or the Google Play Store, what to take, how to choose. But there are actually relatively few of these so-called educational apps that are based on good, solid learning, research into learning, and that have the kind of both formative and validity testing that Rosa and her team undertook for us. So we are trying to make clear to people who might be interested that these really are educational in a sort of demonstrable sense. And then the last thing I'll say, and give it back to you, is that I think over the last year in particular, due to the pandemic, I feel like the phrase screen time has just entered the national vocabulary in a really insistent way. And I completely understand parents' concern about kids spending time on screens. So why would the Harvard Graduate School of Education put out something else that is a screen target? And the basic answer to that is that I think research shows quite clearly that what matters most is not whether you're looking at a screen as much as the content, the quality and content of what you see, and then the way it's contexted or surrounded by things like parent interaction. So we're not at all suggesting that people spend more time on screens instead of going outside or doing all the other healthy things that developing kids should do. But when you do want to spend some time helping your kids get ready for learning, we think these are a good way to do it.
Yeah, and this is something that came up in our initial pilot testing, where we're just kind of seeing what ideas worked and what didn't. And then towards the end of our validation study, where parents often describe that this was something new. So screen time itself, their kids have been using apps, they've been using smartphones for YouTube, for games, for a variety of different purposes. Parents themselves had a lot of experiences about different ways to use their smartphones. But this was something different in terms of the kind of educational apps that you might find. Not only is it something that we're trying to validate and really show that it's actually can help children and their families, But it provides something, this new experience where parents and children could engage together and have these quality interactions that we know are really important for children's early development, but in particular for their early language and literacy development. So it was really nice hearing from parents. Like at first, like a lot of reactions were like, this is a bit uncomfortable because they're not used to, like, this is one of the first types of apps in this age range where we're asking parents to use an app with their child rather than it being just targeted for their child. So there is that initial discomfort where we're like, this is a new experience. I'm not sure exactly, who should hold the phone, how should I hold the phone, who should have agency in this interaction. But over time, we really saw how parents and children were both gaining more comfort and kind of learning what their role is in terms of how they should be using these apps. And so it was wonderful to see that from parents and really get their feedback to really understand not only how these apps that we develop are working, but understand how parents and children are using media, especially this type of mobile media in their homes and in everyday life.
Okay. Thanks. That was really wonderful. I think getting insights not onto just the products, but the process and the deep thought and research, both behind the creation of them as well as the usage of them once they've been created. And clearly the research doesn't usurp the wonderful production as well. I mean, they're beautiful apps that I think our kids and parents will really enjoy. One question I had and I see some notes here on this. You talked about, lots of parents have smartphones, lots of parents are using apps with their kids. These clearly have the sort of research behind them as well as, I said, wonderful production. How do you sort of make sure that these particular apps get into the hands of a diverse set of parents, that can be doing this, so it doesn't sort of create further inequities within our educational system?
Yeah, great question, Eric. Of course, we're trying to do reach as many outlets as we can like this. That's one of the reasons we really appreciate your invitation to be on the open learning talk, but in a more systematic way. We have the outreach, the communications group at the Harvard Ed School trying to get the word out. I think ultimately, as you well know, the app stores are kind of like that last scene in Indiana Jones in the Ark, where there's just these endless shelves that stretch for miles, and they're all filled with treasure boxes. And I'm sure each of the people who put their treasure out there think that they really are the best thing in the store. So it's really hard. And I think we'll hope that Common Sense Media and some of the other outlets that review and are respected by parents will discover them and give them positive notice. Just one other thing I'll say, because you'll appreciate this as a member of the MIT faculty, is that it was hard to think about what role the name Harvard should play in this. It's not obvious that all parents feel warmly toward Harvard or think of the pointy head researchers there as the people they really want to entrust their kids to. So on the other hand, we thought that because these are, as far as I know, the first digital learning products that have the Harvard name on them, that would help us in the end get some attention, and hope that it helps bring them to parents' notice. But you really put your finger on a good question.
Thanks. I'm going to ask a little follow-up question there, because I think, as you said, this is an early or the first product that Harvard's put its name on this, certainly in this realm. What kind of role do you sort of see, these kind of partnerships and sort of academia playing in sort of being able to get some of these quality products into the marketplace?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that Harvard and MIT leapt in together pretty quickly on the MOOC front, the massive open courses, and that edX, which really began as a Harvard-MIT partnership, although now I know has many other university partners, is one of the largest providers of higher ed offerings around the world. So maybe it's not crazy to think that the Scheller Center and the Ed School, could, and other interested parties in Harvard and MIT could build on this in some ways. That's another reason that although we maybe started with the idea of putting these in the hands of an established distributor, a scholastic type organization, that I decided near the last minute that maybe we'd change strategies and try to get them published with Harvard's name on them. You'll also know from your own experience that getting a major institution to approve something for, especially something kind of unfamiliar like an app, is a big undertaking. And I now know a whole lot more about the central administration of Harvard University than I ever really set out to learn. But I'm really glad that Harvard in the end did decide that this was a good thing to do and open this door to digital dissemination of learning products.
I'll ask sort of two combined questions here. There's a question about, have you found there being a technology knowledge gap as you sort of roll this out into the field and work with different kinds of families? Is there a knowledge gap that's out there? And if so, what kind of training is required to sort of help bridge that gap? And I don't know if you want to bring up another app to kind of give a sense of how the app actually works and how someone might think about using it.
Great idea. But first, maybe I could invite Rosa, whose research goes actually beyond the Reach Every Reader apps into her own dissertation work on parents' use of technology, to respond to that gap question, and then I'll show another app.
Yeah, I've been looking at this in my work and trying to understand exactly, like, when we say knowledge gap, what exactly are we referring to with knowledge. From our work, we primarily try to do validation research and initial pilot research with these apps with low-income families in the Boston area, and really trying to see, what are the kinds of things that they struggled with in terms of, like, what information do they have access to in terms of the technology devices that they use? How are they using it? Are there any types of areas in their usage that display some of these gaps where they might have more struggle understanding the various ways that they can engage with the device? I will say that from the research and from our experiences working with families, there is a lot of variability in terms of parents' comfort with technology. Some of that has to do with just parents who just are using smartphones and tablets at a different rate. Some of them use it all the time and they're reporting their usage to be at the really high levels. And other families who are really only use it for certain functions, such as just like, communication, virtual communication, especially much more now. And so in our work, that was something that we wanted to pay attention to, especially in the first stages where we have all these ideas about like how we think people will use an app, how they will use a device when they see, in the example of animal antics, like, is something like pressing a button intuitive and following the prompts that we have on the screen, are those intuitive? Well, parents know how to use them from various backgrounds. And so we really try to recruit diverse samples of families, even within certain income brackets, so that we could try to see, like, what are the kinds of design choices that we can make that can help parents from all different backgrounds use these apps successfully in a variety of different ways. There's no right or wrong way of using the apps. And this is something that we stress with the parents a lot in the whole piloting stage, and especially when we're doing our validation work. And it's something that we try to communicate as well in the final version of the app, where we have an initial setup that we skipped over in the demo that Joe showed, but that we really strive to inform parents about how they can use the app, but that there's the options are endless in terms of how they can create stories and use the various functions that are displayed there.
And connected to that and to the other questions you asked, Eric, you might ask, well, why do we have 3 apps? And one of the major answers is because we know that there's variety in what parents feel comfortable doing and how families play together. So we wanted to take different approaches to the same goal. let me show you a second app, which is quite different from the Animal Antics, just to give you a more concrete feel for that. This is Small Wonders, which we developed in association with GBH, the public television station in Boston. And you can see right away at the top that there's actually both a play section and a separate grown-up section, which if we have time later, I might go into, but that section includes not only your basic tutorials and how to play with the app, but also some demonstrations that might be useful to parents about how to get the most out of them. But to go into the play section, this app is divided into 4 different areas we thought kids and families would be interested in: food, faces, outdoors, and things around the home. And just first to give you a sense of this, each of those quadrants has in turn a number of different games and activities. And let's look at this tap and talk. And here you can see that we're cueing parents along the way, so that it really doesn't take much preparation to get ready to play with this. But the idea of this game is to talk about the different visuals that you see and play some games like this one, which ones go together. And you can sort of keep searching until you try to get a unified set, or you can look at a different prompt to keep the conversation going. Oh, well, I lucked out there. That's 3 happy faces. I already won that game. Let's try another prompt here. Let's find some sad faces. Oh, wow. Well, I'm not trying to pretend to be good at this. I'm just being very lucky. So anyway, that's the one kind of game that's on offer. And then another thing that we provide is activities. So here is a shopping game. And the idea here, and this is very important in all of the apps, Eric, is that we try to model things that you can do outside the home, as well as games that you can play sitting on your couch, right? So that you carry the behaviors out into the grocery store, or things you can do while sitting in the doctor's office or in the bus or so on. And the last thing I'll show, I don't want to take everybody's time doing too much of this, but there are also some just fun things to do together that are not particularly work, just things you can do, like this song, which after I play a little bit of it, you'll say, thanks for giving me an earworm for the rest of my day. But we'll see if
things are really busy. I think we need a break. Instead of watching TV, is there something we can make? Find a simple recipe, something that sounds fun, something that tastes good and yummy. Once we have it done, we'll gather our ingredients, get our pots and pans. Then we'll put an apron on, oh yeah, and wash our hands. We'll follow the directions, stir things in a bowl, put everything together. Hey, we're on a roll. When we make food together, we make memories too. So it's off to the kitchen for me and you. Come on, let's cook. Let's cook. It's
all right, so you get enough of that. But you can see that there's messages in there about doing things together and about talking together about what you're doing. And in our research, we found that kids actually learned the song, and that was a reinforcement for actually getting the parent to get up and go into the kitchen.
Thanks. My next question is, does everybody else want pancakes now, like I do? All right, I'll leave that one as an open-ended question. Liz,
I'm old enough to remember the F&T diner, Eric, where you any time of day or night.
Yes, yeah, I'm a big breakfast for dinner person. Liz, I have a question for you. You mentioned the sort of the breadth of Reach Every Reader, how it reaches across multiple institutions, multiple sort of venues in terms of both sort of in-school stuff, assessment, out-of-school homes. How did this sort of come to be, and how did you sort of wrangle this all together?
Well, it was lots of people wrangling. It started over 5 years ago, I would say, with some early conversations between the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative and the Harvard Graduate School of Education that were about the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which had recently started really investing in education, trying to figure out how can we invest in education, which is one of our core commitments, in a way that accesses existing knowledge, develops knowledge, and what they're most interested in is how do we reach as many children as possible, as quickly as possible. And they were frankly a little skeptical about higher education. They said, academics always produce stuff, but nobody ever uses it. And like, how are you going to be different? And meanwhile, they were having kind of similar sets of conversation with MIT. And so even though, academia is not known for its rich collaboration, either internally or across institutions, we said, hey, maybe we should kind of get together on this. And the original conversations were really about personalized learning, which, 5 years ago was quite a fad term. And the core idea is, kids are wildly different as learners. And could we make learning experiences that would better fit the various differences that kids bring with them? And so that's kind of the challenge CZI brought to us. And we said, well, we're interested in that, but we want to address that question about personalized learning by solving some kind of real world problem in education. And so we brainstormed all sorts of different ones. And initially we had like 5 or 6 we were going to try to tackle. And then we said, well, we have the bandwidth for one. So what do we think is most important, and what do we have the best resources and assets to bring to bear on in this collaboration between HGSE and MIT? And we decided on literacy because, as I said, it's a really persistent problem. There's a lot that's known about it, and we have deep expertise at both institutions around it. And yet there's a lot of struggle. So we were really fortunate to eventually, after long conversations with the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, to receive a substantial grant from them. That's when we enlisted Florida State too, to help us. And the rest has been unfolding over time. So that's a little bit of the origin story.
Thanks. I'll ask one quick follow-up that's sort of bridging back to Joe and Rosa's work, which is, if these apps are successful, where do they go from here? We often talk about the word scaling. Does it scale into more apps for the similar audience? Is it moving into school? Is it about moving up ages or domains? Where does it go from there?
Joe, do you want me to take that one, or you want to?
Or you can both take a stab.
Why don't you go first, Liz?
Okay. So the short answer is that with these apps, we're not trying to get, these literacy apps then for older kids, and then we're not trying to develop a whole kind of pantheon and suite of apps. We were trying to see, could we make some apps that were deeply grounded in research that would be fun and useful to people? And so the short answer is we don't have big plans for like the next step after these apps, although it could be that we learn some things as they're out in the world that then prompts another line of research and we go after some more funding, et cetera. We are making several other products that will go out, whether it's that K2 screener, whether it's the K3 intervention, whether it's some of these adult capacity building things, the smart speaker technology you're working on. So we're developing many other things, and we're hoping to build from the lessons we learn in getting these out to also get some of the other things out. So we'll see. We're also still in the process of deciding. We have 3 more years on this grant, and we have to soon decide, are we going to try to sustain Reach Every Reader beyond that 3 years? And if so, what would we focus on? So it could be more to be had there, but we don't have a plan just yet. What else would you add, Joe?
Well, 2 things. Thanks, Liz. I think that everything you said is right for Reach Every Reader. I guess I would add, in terms of scaling, Eric, one way to think about scaling is if we're successful enough that it encourages other colleagues at the Ed School and colleagues of yours and others to mobilize research, to think more about translation of research into practice. I think that's just a critical idea that those of us who really care about what happens in society and not just understanding but changing things. And I think there's some interest among your and my colleagues is, gee, that looked like kind of fun to do and maybe it'll make a difference. So that's one sense of scaling. The other, and this is, I have less idea how to make this happen, but I'm hopeful we can figure it out. And that is to galvanize somebody to sort of take the next step beyond what Common Sense Media is already doing, and not just review apps, but actually create some sort of housekeeping seal of approval kind of badge that designates apps that are genuinely research-based and genuinely tested for their appeal and effectiveness, so as that in the longer term help parents make informed choices. So it's not making more stuff, on Appian Way. It's also making the environment better for both consumers and producers generally.
Thanks. I think those are really important points, and I think that that notion of translation is something that a lot more academics are thinking about as we sort of think about how we make an impact on the world. That sort of translational research is important. There's another question here around the design process. You mentioned the fact that this work is based deeply upon research that sort of backs up the design here. How do you think about the design process? Do you sort of start with the research and then figure out where you go from there, or do you sort of think about kinds of interactivity that you might also want to develop with that, or the sense of playfulness that you want to develop along with that?
Well, we had the privilege, really important opportunity that some of the key researchers are faculty colleagues at Harvard. So I made Meredith Rowe and Paolo Uccelli and Rosa partners in this process from the very beginning. And I think that's really important. I want to say that if you start with just design ideas and interaction ideas and try to build in the research later, that tends to lead to products that aren't really very deep. And if you start with just research at the beginning, you may not make them as fun and engaging as you want. So I try to have all those parties at the table from the very beginning. And of course, I want to emphasize that we did have production partners, as I mentioned, Fable Vision Studios and GBH Boston. So we had people who are really creative in a very special way as part of it. And then more or as important as getting the right start is continuing that. So I think it's a real mistake that people often make, that they bring in one side or the other for a consultation, and otherwise it's move ahead on yourself. That same group of about 8 or 9 key people, researchers at the Ed School and producers at our partners, worked literally together throughout the entire 2.5 year development process. So always pushing back on each other. Is it really fun? Is it really working for learning? And that I think is pretty essential to keep it in the center, doing both.
There's another question here on what this approach here is, sort of this large team-based approach to working on the problem of literacy. There's other efforts, like was mentioned here, the X Prize initiative, that was sort of this global prize in helping to tackle sort of literacy and numeracy. I don't know if you have a specific knowledge of any of the sort of solutions there, but sort of how do you think about the different sort of sets of approaches that we think about in this space, and how to tackle these sort of big issues of literacy and numeracy?
Well, I'll take a shot at that, and then Liz or Rosa, please jump in as well. I think that the X Prize approach of offering pretty large payoff for a successful pilot or something is a great way to encourage both new entrants and sort of people pushing harder than they might otherwise. But I'm also aware from learning research that not everybody thrives on competition. So I don't think that's the only way to do it. And the other thing I'd say is that, and this is a point that Liz made early on in our talk here, is that finding the right size problem. The right size question is really critical. Sometimes these things that come out of the world's largest, richest foundations are kind of impossibly grand, so big that it would be hard to figure what success might even look like and how you would measure it. So I think picking a target that you can actually define and measure is pretty important as well.
Yeah, I think there isn't like a one way approach to either solve the literacy issue or use technology to try to facilitate language and literacy learning around the world. One thing related to like the whole push to do more translational work and apply it into practice is that there isn't going to be a one size fits all, because of like research is going to show like X, Y, and Z factors really help support children in various ways, but we know how important context matter, and then trying to make that make sense with reality. So especially with like things like screen time, we know how that can be very difficult to keep children away from. And so instead of trying to keep children away from screen time, thinking about how what we know about research and what we know about reality, how can we mesh those together? And these apps might work for certain families. We saw them working with a variety of different families, but they might work better for some than for others. And this is where having multiple approaches that can work in multiple contexts, but if some of them might have to be designed for a particular context, if we really want to make an impact in a particular space, age range. There's just so many different contextual factors that we have to think about as we're designing and trying to really apply what we know works into different types of populations.
Thanks. This is a question a little bit more generally about working with kids around these kinds of digital assets. Do you find that in your work with parents and kids that young kids are increasingly having sort of a comfort level with digital technologies? I dare use the phrase digital native, which is a controversial phrase. And do you have any insights from that in terms of the way that kids interact with these sort of interactive technologies, particularly ones as we sort of get more AI behind a lot of these things?
So I'm going to ask Rosa to talk about that, since she's spent so much time looking at kids and parents. But I just want to preface it with something we didn't really get a chance to mention, I don't think, so far, Eric, which is that the research behind animal antics that I showed first was 2 summers ago, but we deliberately offset the production cycle so we could focus on each app as we moved along. And therefore, the research on Small Wonders was scheduled to take place this past summer. And of course, due to the pandemic, we couldn't send research assistants out to people's homes the way we had done the summer before. So we really kind of baffled for a little while as to how we were going to test these. And I finally thought of finding an entertainment research company, the kind of folks that game developers hire to test new software. And because they have the experience of how to recruit a national sample and then use video to go into people's homes and see what they're doing with the product. And it turned out to be a very fruitful collaboration. May or may not change the way that academic research is done in the future. I don't know, but it's pretty cool to be able to sort of peek over the researcher's shoulder and actually watch live as parents and kids used Small Wonders. So with that little background, Rosa, I'll let you have a go at Eric's question about digital natives and digital migrants and all those different terms we use.
Yes, that was one of my most favorite experiences, just watching kids interact with the app, especially when it was a new thing. Like they took, when it came to like, I'm talking to the parent and child and saying, you're going to use this app together. And the child automatically is like, I know how to do this. I know how to turn on the phone. I can get to the app. And sometimes they could do it better than their parents. And this is something that as we were developing the apps, we had to keep in mind that not only relates to kind of one of the first questions on like the knowledge gap, like parents and children have various different skill sets when they're using these apps, various levels of comfort. And then thinking about who takes the role of like being the one, like the director of its interaction. And sometimes, and often it was the child in terms of like understanding how to navigate the app and use it. But really, because we were trying to have these apps be used with the parent, and we were having things like animal antics, or we're asking them to create stories for a 3-year-old, even a 4-year-old, that can be very difficult. And so they're like, all of the kids were like, I know how to use the app. This is where the parent could come in and be like, here, let me help you think of a way to tell this story about going to the library. And that's where they really could fit into that particular role. But it was fascinating seeing how children were already trying to, like, they had their ideas about how to use an app. And this is where we got a lot of parent feedback. It's like, my child is normally used to like watching YouTube, like that's what they are used to seeing with the smartphone. And so really us introducing them to this kind of app really kind of opened, I think, both the child and the parents' viewpoints on the various ways that they can actually interact with these. But I think it was wonderful just watching the kids, because it was something where they were helping their parents in some ways, and then the parents would help them. And it was just such a beautiful experience, and to really see them helping each other. And that's not something you always see. And then, and this is something that parents brought up, where they're like, oh, like, what we experience in the app, I can try to take that and apply it to some other kinds of settings that aren't only in the app, because that's one of the other main goals we had, is that this is really meant to be a tool to really help parents and children learn about ways that they can have conversations with each other. And so being able to take what they're learning from these interactions with the app and apply it into their everyday lives is something that was nice to hear that their parents were trying to do.
Eric, there's one topic we haven't really had a chance to touch on that I would love to say a word about, if that's okay.
Go ahead, yeah, please.
And as we've made a big point of talking about the diversity of families, and we hope we'll use these, and how we tried to make them easy to use. We haven't really talked about cultural diversity in language, and also ethnic and racial diversity. And those are, of course, the things we thought about very deeply, or tried to anyway, in the gestation period when planning the apps. And there are a couple of things that I want to point out. One is that kind of in the same tradition of the Muppets, we chose, as you've seen, animated characters with either as animals or with essentially non-human characteristics. You may or may not have been able to tell in the Small Wonders app that the characters are actually derived from vegetables, cucumber and so on. So we thought those would be universal and not feel like they were part of any particular racial or ethnic group. And in a sort of similar spirit, we worked with our research colleagues, and particularly Paolo Uccelli, who's an expert on bilingualism and learning in different language communities, to try to make the situations in the apps as universal as possible, so that going to the doctor, going grocery shopping, things that all families, at least all Western families, have to do. So although the apps as they are currently out are only in English, we think that it might be possible to render them still culturally acceptable in other languages, if anybody, if the wherewithal is forthcoming to do that. So I just wanted to add that to the thoughtfulness we had to bring to bear on this. Great, thanks.
I don't know if we have time to demo your last app, but maybe you could at least tell us what the third app was.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yes, I'm so fumbly with it turns out that actually looking at the computer screen while operating the phone screen is even harder than I thought it might be, or at least it is for me. So I will just describe it very briefly. It's the third app is called Photo Play, and as you might guess from the name, it's based around your own photo. So you import a family picture or a picture of your child, and then there's a raft of different things you can do with the picture, whether it's decorating by writing or drawing on it, making it into a cartoon by adding speech bubbles, adding stickers or other things that kids like to play with. And in the end, I think what this enables me to underline is that the three apps, while they all share the goal of early literacy foundations, and particularly of sustained back and forth conversation, they do it in different ways. Animal Antics by the recording process. So you have to have a dialogue to go back and forth to play the game. The Small Wonders that I showed second, by having modeling activities that you would do together in which you have to talk to do the activity. And Photoplay, which is the easiest one to use for talking about things that you've done together in the past or things that you're planning to do in the future. And those are really important literacy skills as well.
Great. I think this will be my last question here. I see Claudia's asking, would you encourage other institutions of higher ed to develop similar apps to scale the impact, or what advice, what might you give to other institutions of higher education as they're sort of looking to solve similar problems?
Oh, interesting. Well, I certainly encourage other higher ed institutions to think about the translation of research into practice that we talked about earlier. And today, I think that means the first place I would look would be digital products, whether apps or websites or videos from YouTube or whatever. But I hope that they wouldn't just come into the preschool space that we've begun to pioneer, but that they might serve the whole gamut of learners. And in particularly, probably the two least well-served audiences, which are young teens, people beyond middle school, but not yet in college, for whom there's just not a lot of good media out there of any sort. And then for the most mature audiences, maybe age 50 and above, where people are starting to find time to learn new things or gather new hobbies or change careers. And there's a lot of opportunities there. So yes to the initiative, but think about more different directions to go.
Great, thank you. So I think we are just about out of time. There's been some notes that we will be sharing this, sharing the video from this talk on our website, so folks can catch this and share this with other people who weren't able to make it today. I want to thank all of our panelists here for talking about this really interesting project, and I'm looking forward to seeing where we go next as we continue on this great journey to try to make a real difference in early literacy. And I would also like to thank, as Liz mentioned, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative for supporting this work with Reach Every Reader, which has really been a great collaborator and partner and supporter of this work in making this a reality. And thank you for listening in today and for all the great questions. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Eric. Thanks for having us. We're really excited to share these apps with the world, but also it's always a pleasure to talk to you and to recognize the great work that you and your colleagues are doing as well. So thank you for having us here.
Thank you.